So let's talk about you for a few minutes.
Oh, thank you.
First of all, it's amazing to look at your educational background and where you're at today. How do you go from being an English major and professor to a technology guru? That's
You
a
mean
big chasm.
you mean it? The fact that I did my dissertation on a guy named Edmund Spenser in a poem called "The Fairy Queen," written at about the time of Shakespeare. You don't think that relates to high tech?
It's a bit of a stretch. I don't
Bit of a
know.
stretch.
Maybe
So,
it's
so okay. So to be fair, like many entrepreneurial people, there was a life event. So it's like if you were in Houston when the oil bust, that was a life event, right? Our life event was I was teaching college in Michigan, small college in Michigan. Our family was young, and we just needed to get back to California for a lot of family reasons, and just where it's kind of where we fit. So we moved. We said we're moving back to California. Well, there were no jobs in academia, so I mean that was a closed door. So it's like, well, I don't know, what am I going to do? So I got a job. There was a software company applying for they wanted a person to set up a training program. I said, well, I don't know anything about software, but I know something about training. And the guy who hired me, I think he knew. He said, "Look, I mean, this kid doesn't know anything about anything, but he seems kind of bright. He went to Stanford. He's got what the hell? He seems energetic and personable. I'm going to mold him." And it was kind of, I mean, really, I was completely mentored. And I said to him, I said, "Well, I don't know anything about computers. I'm not going to be able to learn that." He said, "Oh yeah, no, you'll learn it." And so I remember with him, it's funny. So I'm about 6 months in, and I've now done this training program, and I've interviewed everybody in the company, and I've figured out the training needs, and I'm doing all this thing. And I say to him, I say, "Don," I said, "there's one person that doesn't have a training program." And I said, he said, "Who's that?" I said, "That's me." And he said, "Oh, no, no, we have a training program." I said, "Well, no, we don't. I'm the training guy." "No, we don't." He said, "Oh, yeah, we're using the pretend method of training." I said, "What's the pretend method of training?" He said, "Well, when you applied for this job, you pretended that you knew how to do it. And I pretended to believe you. And now you're learning." So anyway, that's how I got in. And then once I was in, I migrated into sales and marketing. I was never very good at sales because I could open, but I wasn't very good at closing. But when I got into marketing, then it was
OJT.
marketing is like storytelling, and storytelling is like literature. So there was a connection actually eventually.
Interesting. Very interesting.
No, in fact, let me build on that just a tiny bit because I spent a lot of time in venture capital. Venture capital is almost entirely storytelling because there's no facts, right? It's all narrative. And so what you learn as a literature major is you learn to tell the difference between a credible narrative and a non-credible narrative. And actually that's actually part of the skill set.
I wish I knew you when I was trying to raise capital. We had an amazing idea, but for whatever reason, well, of course, we tried to raise capital in 2009, which was the worst
Different time.
time. But still, you would figure we'd be able to, and it was tough sledding. Anyway, when you look at your career, which is extended over a fair amount of time at this point, what are I guess we could talk about the books, but I'm not looking for that. More with client work. What are some of the finer, most rewarding moments of your career,
You know,
particularly in terms of clients actually implementing your
yeah,
framework?
yeah. I think being in well, so I think in every 5 to 10 year period there was a client, kind of I would call it an iconic client. Like my first iconic client was HP, and HP actually brought me in to do Crossing the Chasm. But that was my first tornado I ran into, which was their laser printer and then their inkjet printer tornadoes. And so there was a ton of learning from that. And then kind of as we got into the second half or got into the 90s, Cisco was probably the iconic client for me then. And John Chambers brought me in, and this book Dealing with Darwin was written as Cisco as the case study. So for 2 years, he let me come to every one of their strategic offsites. And you got behind the curtain. And I think when you get behind the curtain, you get to see stuff that I don't care if you're a professor at Harvard. You don't get to see that stuff if you're a researcher. But if they invite you in and they make you part of the conversation, you can. So that was kind of huge for me. I think more recently, the two organizations that were behind Zone to Win, Microsoft and Salesforce. Microsoft, there was a guy there named Chi Lu who was sort of second. He was running all of the online stuff, and then he had all of Office. he was just one of these amazing leaders. And then Mark Benioff at Salesforce is another one. And those are two men who both inspired me to go beyond my limits. I think just because they were going beyond their limits, and I thought, wow, I like to be in service to things that help the world. I think that companies like Microsoft and Cisco and HP and Salesforce do help the world, and so that's kind of where I get my gratification.
Great. I'm going to combine the next two questions because I'm guessing that that's going to make sense to you. I was going to ask you what areas of interest are most relevant for you today, but I'm going to combine that with asking you about this new book that's going to hit next month. So you've got a new book called The Infinite Staircase. I have no idea what it's about. Tell us a little bit about it, and if there is anything else, really captivating your attention, we'd love to hear about that.
Well, to be fair, it is definitely captivating my attention because this is the first book that was written for a completely different audience. Well, let me put it this way, a completely different relationship to the audience. So, and it's obvious from the subtitle of The Infinite Staircase is what the universe tells us about life, ethics, and mortality. So this is obviously not a business book. This is a book about, this is like, what the heck is going on around here? It's sort of like the ultimate strategy book, right? What's your strategy for living, right? It was just one of those things that I just needed to write, and it had going for me. So yeah, I mean, but it's a framework. I mean, it's like everything else I do, right? There's a framework, and the framework says, well, here's how you can look at the world. The problem it was trying to address was, we have this incredibly credible narrative about how the world came into existence. We now pretty sure that 13.8 billion years ago, there was a Big Bang. And you can kind of get from the Big Bang to now in this whole science-based narrative, which is fascinating in itself. And part of what I wanted to do is just, there's so many specialist stories in that journey. There's physics and chemistry and biology and sociology. It's just all this stuff. So I wanted to kind of pull it together in something that was digestible. But then the second question is, well, where's morality come from? Because morality was always, well, that was from God, right? We have the Bible, we have this, and we have the Quran, well, what if you say, well, wait a minute, if that's not what happened, now where's that come from? And so that's why the ethics part came into the world. So how would you derive an ethical position out of what I would call a secular or scientific narrative of the world? So that was important to me because I go back to, I was a liberal arts teacher, and the purpose of the liberal arts is to help people think through these basic life issues.
Interesting. Very interesting.